My name is Don Dickson. I want to welcome you to another edition of my structure fishing workshop. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion of structure breaks and break lines, more specifically breaks and break lines. That's what we've been talking about in the last few sessions, and today I want to really zero in on break lines, some of the most important break lines we have in fishing. Before we even get started, just as a little review, I want to make sure that we understand the difference between a break and a break line. Now, a break line is a feature that runs for a distance. It could be a weed line. It could be an increase in depth, which we talked about. Could be a decrease in depth, is referred to a break line, if it runs for a distance. Typical breaks that we think of would be a pile of rocks, a stump, something of that nature that's a one singular thing that's stationary. But a break line is something that runs for a distance that the fish can follow, and it comes in many different forms. Now, if I had to pick just one break line in the overall picture of successful fishing, which break line would I pick? You're looking at it, that's it. The drop off, or that final break line into the river channel or side feeder stream cut, that final break line in the natural lake to the deep water hole or slot. That's it. Number one by far. Now there's a couple of good reasons for that. Why would I say that? First, we've already established in our recent studies there is such a thing as a deep water sanctuary zone of the school of big fish. Now, when the fish move out of their deep water home on a movement, the first thing they encounter, the first break line they encounter on this migration is this one. Is the one we're talking about. It's the first thing they see. Now, the second reason, and I can tell you this is really, really, really important. In many fishing situations, the migration of the fish will start and hit that break line, but that's where it will end. The weather and water conditions won't allow the fish to move any shallower. So right there is where they stop. Folks, I'm not kidding you. I can't even begin to tell you certainly over the last 20 years, as fishing seemed to have gotten a little more difficult each and every year, weather and water conditions, things were changing a bit. We weren't getting movements quite so shallow. And I can't even begin to think of a number that I could give you of a situation I was in where the fish hit that contact point, they hit that very first break line, and that was as far as they went. But yet I was able to limit out. At my summer on the water schools, can't even begin to tell you how many limits of fish we caught between 42 and 47 feet. So many times fish would move to 47, they wouldn't go any further. They'd move to that very first break line, the edge break line to that deep water hole. They would limit out, and the students would limit out. But the fish never moves shallower. Happens all the time. So when you look at this side view, deep water, we have the deep water, we have this channel break line, we have the break line to the deep water hole or slot in your lake, depending on where you're fishing. That break line, where it breaks into the channel, where it breaks into the hole, or breaks into that deep water slot, that's the number one break line in fishing, period. If we could only choose one, that would be it. So it becomes so important, but yet here's the catcher on this. Here's the killer on this. For, I guess, a multitude of reasons, but this is a fact. Of the thousands of fishermen that I've dealt with personally, you'd be amazed to find out how many fishermen for some reason or another, have a fear of these break lines, of these channel break lines out in the middle of the lake, in most cases because they're deep or they're relatively deep. There is this trepidation of going downstairs to do their fishing. And I, for one, never really understood that much because I've been on a football field many, many times. And when I say I've got a deep break line, a drop off at 30 feet, most fishermen look at me like, oh boy, I don't think I want to go down to 30 feet. That's 10 yards, guys. That's 10 yards on a football field. That's 30 feet. Turn it this way, it's 30 feet. It's nothing. But yet there's this fear, whatever reason, of going downstairs. Either one, they can't interpret it, they can't read it, or they're not experienced trollers, they can't follow along it. For whatever reason, this break line that I'm showing you, to the slot, to the hole, or to the channel, is the one that's given the least amount of attention by the fishermen. They overlook it. They don't fish it. But yet, there's no doubt, it is the most important break line that we can fish, period. I want you to understand that in many, many cases, there'll be many days in your fishing life where the fish will move from the deep water home to that first break line, but their movement and or their migration is going to be limited to that break line. And if you're on that break line and those fish become active and they hit that break line and that's where it stops, you can limit out on big fish. I've done it thousands of times. I've had students with me. We've done it thousands of times when the fish would not move any shallower. They were active, but they didn't move any shallower. The weather and water conditions wouldn't permit it. So if you have a fear of working these deeper break lines to the channel or to the deep water hole, you need to get rid of that fear. You need to go out there and think about it as, what's 30 feet deep? It's 10 yards. What's 60 feet deep? It's 20 yards. Not a big deal. We talked about it a few weeks ago. I said that, that's the red zone. It's not all that far. If you go out there and run it, not that far. And when you turn it this way, it's not that deep either. It just sounds deep because most people fish 3 feet of water or 6 feet of water. So when you say 60 feet or 30 feet, they go, oh my goodness, what are you talking about? But yet, on so many occasions, that's where we've all limited out, structure fishermen limit out on big hog fish, the school of big fish. They hit that first break line and that's as far as they go, and you're in the right place, fishing in the right way, you limit out. So if you are one of those folks who have a fear of going downstairs, I need to get you to eliminate that fear. Get better at your mapping, get better at your trolling procedures, get better at your lure presentation. You need to start getting good in those deeper depths, and especially at this feature. That final break line to the deep water is what I'm talking about. Now I want to show you another situation that's very, very important. And to help along with that, I've got this diagram which shows a top view of an area of a reservoir where the main river channel swings in close to shore. Okay, now as you look at that diagram, out in the lake, it appears as though we've formed kind of a two-sided bar. In effect, that's what it is, a two-sided bar. We really only have that deep water. We only have the channel and that drop off to the channel on the right-hand side of that bar. It's literally like a two-sided bar. Now, the deepest water in that situation would most commonly be out in the lake, out near the end of the bar. So you start following that drop off, that edge break line to the channel. And the further you go, as you're looking at this diagram, the further you go, the closer you're getting to the shoreline, and the further you go, closer and closer and closer. And it's getting shallower and shallower and shallower. Now, what makes this situation so important is it doesn't matter how far the fish move or how long they stay, they always have immediate access. Regardless of where they are along that break line, they have immediate access to that channel, to their sanctuary. Now, if you would like to have me just one more time, I promise it'll be the last time, because it sets up perfectly, and we've already talked about it, 100 times before. Palm de terre. This is the kind of the situation I was in at Palm de Terre. Now, like any other break line, we need to find a break on that break line. The fish will be moving along that break line, but they will pause and eventually stop at a break on that break line. We've talked about that before. Now, as I was following that drop off, this situation at Palm de Terre, when I came to that sharper break that was occurring in just one spot, it was even sharper than all of the rest. That was my break on the break line. So again, I can use that analogy. And we're going to talk more about the breaks on the break lines as we get into further discussion of break lines. But keep in mind, when you see this situation like I'm showing you on this map, the channel forms this bar and comes in and swings in close to the bank. This is a terrific break line situation. Now, the first time Buck took me to a reservoir where he showed me this exact situation that I'm showing you right here. After he went over all of the details about it, had me look at it on the depth sonder and so forth, he said, remember this. And again, when Buck said, don't ever forget this, make sure you remember this, I knew it was important. But he said, take my word for it. This is what I refer to as almost the perfect break line situation. He says, number one, he said, if you find, now keep in mind, it's an edge, drop off, break line situation to deep water, but it's where we have this structure situation involved, where it swings in close to the bank, creates an uphill situation, and everything we just talked about. He said, when you find that in your reservoir, I promise you, it will be the most effective break line on your lake, period. So, I've never forgotten. It won me a muskie tournament. But I've encountered it many, many times, and I'm always looking for it. When I look at a map of a reservoir, it's one of the first things I'm looking for. So always keep that in mind. So I hope you learned a little something today. We established what I consider the most important break line we have in fishing. That is the break line to the channel, to the slots, to the deep water holes. And there's just no question about it. It's the most important break line we have in fishing. If you want to produce fish, you have to keep this in mind. Don't ever forget it. Now, another really important break line we have in fishing is a weed line. But there's an awful lot to say about weed lines, so I'm saving that till the next time we get together. So once again, I want to thank you for being with me today, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel here on YouTube, we'd appreciate it if you would. It's important to us. And I thank you again for being with us, and we'll see you the next time.